Instead of the munchies, is there a strain that can actually make you want to eat less? Well, today I'll talk about the lore and truth of THCV. So there's a new type of THC that's popping up in a lot of dispensaries, and that is THCV. This is sometimes labeled as diet weed, but a lot of the claims about it are not entirely backed by science or not at all backed by science. So let's talk through what they say it does and what it actually has been shown to do. So I did my standard sketchy Google search and found all sorts of claims about what THCV supposedly can do. So it's being referred to as this like kind of daytime high. So it's supposed to energize you but not produce any sort of the couch lock. It is also supposed to work as an appetite suppressant, so make you want to eat less. And those are some of the milder claims. For example, this website suggests that it can actually prevent panic attacks, and it is substantially better for people who have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's since it's neuroprotective. But what does the science actually say here? So I'll start with the one that has zero backup whatsoever, and that is the claim that it helps with anxiety. So not even in the animal studies does THCV actually help decrease anxiety. In fact, in mice, it did absolutely nothing. Now, what about the energy claim that it might help you produce like the stimulating effect, like it'll help with focus and attention? Well, there was one study that was done in humans that showed that it could maybe help with things like attention, and it did make people feel more focused and energized. Except it was not specifically THCV that they were studying. It was this proprietary plant that they had just developed, which was a combination of THC and THCV. So, hey, we have this new plant. We're calling it the Get Shit Done plant, not a joke. And this plant will help make you more energized. And here is our study that suggests that you are more energized after you take it. But no, it wasn't peer reviewed, so it's completely fine, right? Now, what about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? Well, there are a few animal studies that suggest that it could be neuroprotective, but this is very early days. And again, those are rat and mouse studies. Those are not human studies. So yeah, I would not recommend that people in advanced stages of cognitive disorders just take this drug because maybe a mouse study suggested it might work. Now, what about the big claim that it is diet weed, so that it works as an appetite suppressant instead of something that makes you hungrier? Well, there's very little evidence there too. So there's a study that suggests that it might help with glucose, so glucose intolerance specifically in mice. And then there was another study done in humans with about 62 people in it. And they found that, yeah, it does help with things like glucose intolerance. But for the mice, it did not actually make them want to eat less. Now, in one study, it did, but in another study, it did not affect mice at all. And then there was this big study that somebody did as their thesis. So again, did not go through peer review, so take that as you will. But in this study, what they did is they basically just gave people THCV and then looked at what effects it had on things like energy and appetite and basically everything. And they're like, yeah, well, we think it's different from THC. We can kind of tell it is different from both THC and from placebo, but it did absolutely nothing to their appetite. It did nothing to cognitive effects. It basically changed absolutely nothing. Now, there was one very strange study where they gave people different doses of THCV and then had them go into an fMRI. So it is a brain scan that is like kind of looking at real-time activation of different parts of your brain. And they found that when looking at pictures of chocolate as well as moldy strawberries, very specifically moldy strawberries, so they wanted something happy, which is chocolate, and something aversive, which is moldy strawberries, they found different patterns of activation in the brain between somebody who was on THCV and somebody who was not. However, that did not link to like whether that person wanted to eat that thing. They did not actually have more motivation to eat. They were not hungrier. It just, their brain was changing differently when they were on this drug. So yeah, there is no good research out there that suggests that it can work as an appetite suppressant, even though it is commonly referred to as diet weed, and that is a claim brought up everywhere. So what do we actually know about THCV? Well, we do know that it is different from THC, so they are chemically different. The problem is that we a lot of times just kind of use these different versions of things and use them interchangeably. So there were some studies that are like looking at delta 8 THCV, and there's some studies that are looking at delta 9 THCV, because now we have delta 8 THC and delta 9 THC. So a lot of times this gets very confused in the science. And there was a study that suggested that the delta 8 THCV was actually potentially good for things like attention and energy, but this was only seen at like random doses. So they're like, yeah, this one dose out of 5 different doses produced this one strange effect here, and this one other dose produced this effect over there. So yeah, I don't really trust that one either. It's not strong evidence, I'll say that for sure. And we don't even know how it works. So it's suggested that it is like a CB1 receptor antagonist, but at higher doses is a CB1 receptor agonist. And you kind of see similar effects with the CB2 receptors too. So it is working differently from THC, but how it works, we're not entirely sure as of the moment. And it gets even weirder than this. Like at a lot of doses, people say, and this is intravenous doses, people say that they can't even tell the effects between it and placebo. So maybe it does nothing. And then there are other studies that say that maybe it reduces THC's effects. So there are studies that show that like THCV actually counteracted THC's effects on pain. And it also did the same thing to things like heart rate and some of the memory issues that you're getting. But they also found that both of them together increase the likelihood of like memory intrusions. So we don't have a lot of evidence that says that THCV does anything even in the animal models, and in the human models we have even less than that. But the amount of misinformation out there is wild. Now, I must say that the best source that I found that had the most unbiased information was Vice, which kind of makes sense because like Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia is one of my favorite shows of all time. I would dream of making a remake of that. That's like one of my life goals. So Vice is actually fairly good at the unbiased information, but if you go to like your local dispensary website, they are telling you some things that are not backed up by basically anything. And even more bad news. And one of the studies, it was talking about how the levels that you get at dispensary, so typically around 5 mgs of THCV, yeah, that actually is not enough to even slightly to produce effects. So even if it did do anything, which we don't have evidence that it does, you probably are getting too low of a dose in the edibles that claim that they're doing all of those things. So is THCV safe? Well, as far as what we know, probably. There are no studies that suggested that it produced negative effects, but there are also no studies that really showed any substantial positive effects from it. So yeah, look at that labeling as misleading at best.